My other device just ran out of memory card capacity, so I'm going to continue this topic on the mobile phone. Anyway, back to the target of hatred. So we just mentioned that during the Cultural Revolution, the top target of hatred is really the Soviet Union, and American is still the enemy, but in practical terms, or in real narratives, they have no real hard criticism of the U.S. other than its foreign policy. Japan, all of the rhetoric against Japan become less and less, and so that was the Cultural Revolution. But after Mao kicked his evil bucket, China started this reform, political reform, economic reform, and with that, of course, we all experienced the dramatic change of economic landscape of China, primarily with the help of business people and companies and international financial institutions to help and to trade and to invest in China from Taiwan, from Japan, from the United States. Through this stage, of course, Soviet Union was lingering in its final days in the 80s, and Soviet Union contributed zero to China's economic success. In fact, Soviet Union never contributed, even after it became it collapsed and became Russia. The only thing they contributed, of course, is some energy, some oil they sold to Chinese government at an inflated price. That said, in the 80s and 90s, China benefited tremendously from economic cooperation with Japan and with the United States and with Western Europe. And China's economic taken off, it was credited almost entirely to this mutually beneficial economic relationship. And of course, the US and the West also benefited from the low-cost products. And the inflation in the US was kept very low, primarily because products made in China, they're not as good as that from Japan, but they're really, really cheap. I personally experienced that firsthand. In the 80s, the first time I see the Baixiang Naitang, first time it was loosely packaged in a very sloppy package, sold for very, very cheap. But I know that was the type of candy I used to take. I bought some and it was still very good. Anyway, and gradually with this Liang Baijin taking power, the whole thing began. I'm going to skip the period of the honeymoon period between Deng and Jiang and Hu, and focusing on the Liang Baijin. With the Liang Baijin in power, the target of hatred switched from, well, before Liang Baijin, there was really no real target of hatred for a while. But after that, target hatred became increasingly towards Japan, towards United States, and basically all of a sudden, the country that contributed zero to China's economic success, but contributed greatly to the devastation and catastrophic failure, which is Soviet Union or Russia, became China's closest allies. And so if we look at this target of hatred, let's forget about the Russia for the time being. Between US and Japan, to hate Japan is so easy, as I mentioned earlier. So all of these anti-Japanese movies and TV shows and the story was so ridiculously farcical and the reason there are so many such TV plays, first of all, it greatly distorted history because the Chinese communists really did not contribute to the defeat of Japan. But the history was so distorted, and the storylines in those movies are so comical, farcical, or ludicrous that even the viewer themselves watch them not as a piece of history, but as purely as a comical entertainment. And but still, if you keep on doing this hatred of Japan, of course, I personally knew from my father's told me the story about Japan's occupation of China. It is extremely evil. I mean, the Japanese at that time was really evil, and so that period of history is not is not what today's Chinese communists use as the reason to hate the Japanese. Well, I would say that period of history is to use to hate the Japanese, but it's not the true reason. The true reason was because Japan is sleeping with the United States, is in the same camp, is a close strategic, economic, and political partner. And Japan's political system is emulating that of the United States. And such system is what the communists hate most. Back to United States. Why do they hate the United States? For exactly the same reason. If the United States is run by a dictator, let's say like someone like Putin, but with its tremendous economic power, China would love to have the closest relationship possible, because a totalitarian regime, whoever that is, will be like a magnet of opposite pole attracting to another totalitarian regime. So China would love the whole nation, the whole world are run by dictators. Every nation was run by dictators. That will be their wet dream. But unfortunately, United States is ideologically a tremendous threat to the rule of the Chinese communists, because of all of the things that threaten threaten China. The freedom of the press, I would say that threatens even more than the democracy itself. Of course, democracy is based on the freedom of press, but democracy is based on votes, and China can do this fake votes, and they call it 全国中民主. They could emulate that, but they cannot really fake the freedom of the press. Today, they even overtly said, we cannot let everyone free say everything, because that will be creating a lot of what you call the bad corruptions or whatever. But so this is the part, the United States political system and the general mindset of people who are used to that system could tremendously undermine the CCP's rule. If there is even a single independent media, press, whether it's newspaper or a website, just a single one, imagine if that exists in China, that could openly criticize or openly disclose the inner ugly corruptions of the top-tier communist rulers. That could be enough to topple this regime. This regime is highly fragile, even though they have all of these show of force, show of goose stepping, and all of these CCTV nightly propaganda showing how strong, how 厉害国 we are. But they are really, really fragile. And the thing that can cause the whole thing to collapse is really the truth, the freedom of the press. And that part is what frightened them. But if we look at the amount of information distributed in the world, There were some statistics. I forgot the exact details, the exact amount. But basically, of the information being consumed on the internet, I recall it was 70% or something. A vast majority is in English. And then followed by some other languages. And Russian is another one, because most of the East European countries, sometimes there are a lot of Russian speakers. But the Chinese language, even though China has a quarter, maybe a 20%, a fifth of the world population. I mean, right now they're ranked as the most populous nation with India, whichever is most, but still. So that means, how do I get across here? Oh, so that means Chinese content should proportionally take a large portion of the amount of information. But the statistic is just surprising, shocking. Chinese content only consists of 1.2 or 1.3% of the total amount of information being distributed on the internet. So what does that really mean? That means that all the Chinese content we can read in the Chinese platform, particularly simplified Chinese, are really internally regurgitated, recirculated within China. And the source of that regurgitation is from Chinese propaganda. Basically, it's like you eat your own meat, your own meal. Then you crap out after your digestion. Then you eat the crap again. And then you crap it out again. You eat it again. 内循环. You basically just eat your own shit. So this reinforcement of Chinese communist shit over and over is really what the Chinese information is about. And that kind of shit, that kind of crap, is entirely contained for the mainland Chinese to consume. And that's why the information worldwide is vastly more diverse, vastly more multifaceted, except the Chinese content. And this part is what the Chinese government can love to see. But if any of the United States system of free media, freedom of the press, I'm broadly speaking about the freedom of the press of all of the major media, mainstream media, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and Google and Facebook and all of that. Of course, there are a lot of people will say, well, the Facebook and Google, they all have their censorship and all of that. To some extent, it is. But that's not on the same level as the censorship of the Chinese government. And also Facebook and all of that, they are not censoring together. Whatever Facebook censor, you could get it from X or Twitter. Whatever Twitter censor, you might get it from Google or from CNN or from CNBC or whatever. But China, whatever they censor, is censored across every single media platform. And if the United States has its way, let's say it has its Google or has its whatever other media entering China, it could spell the end of the Communist Party. It is as serious as that. It could spell the end of them. Because if people start to use Google, they immediately see whatever they see there is totally inconsistent with what they read on People's Daily on the CCTV. And such a dramatic contrast is what American system provides, that threatens, frightens, and scares the communist regimes. And therefore, the top target of hatred for the United States the top target of hatred for the CCP is truly the United States and its allies. But at the core of it is the United States. So to hate the United States is less easy than to hate the Japanese. How to do it? Well, let's rewrite the history. Let's make more movies. There was that recent Chinese movie. I didn't watch it. I forgot the name of it. It's a Chosen Reservoir. I had a talk on that in the Korean War. They described the Chinese armies fighting the U.S. It is an existing, historically real event, except the movie described it in an entirely distorted and flipped way. Because I read books on this topic and I gave talks, and it was entirely different from what that movie said. Even though I haven't watched the movie, but I did see the description of the movie, the summary, synopsis of the movie. So, back to the hatreds. If we use the same criteria to hate the Japanese, in fact, the Chinese should hate the Russia more than anyone else. As we know, China lost most of its territory to the Russian Empire, not to the Soviet Union, but to the Russian Empire. The outer Manchuria was lost, and there are vast regions of border regions in Xinjiang and those areas were lost. They were lost primarily to the Russian Empire. But, you know, if we look at Putin today, Putin is not trying to revert Russia back to the Soviet Union. He hates the communist system himself for some reason. Because I guess what he's really worship is the old Russian Empire. He wants to restore the Russian Empire, its territory, its influence over its vassal states in the Baltics, in Poland, in Ukraine, and the Caucasus region. And they want to control the entire vast land and as much as possible to restore the old boundaries of the Russian Empire. This is what Putin wants. But this is exactly at the expense of the territorial loss by China. And today, if someone even talk about this, he might be blocked by the Chinese media. So the Chinese Communist Party really do not choose their love or hate for the people to do based on history. It is really based on, back to what I just said, based on what they need politically. Whatever need for them to assure their power, to assure that the people are being fooled and follow them on their rhetorical bullshit, follow them on their distorted version of history, or follow them on their ideological narratives is the way to go. And for that, back to what I just said, the easiest target to hate is Japan. The reason is Japan is with the United States. And the real target of hatred should be the United States of America. And they have never let go of that target. Not from the time of Beijing, but actually from the very beginning. From Deng Xiaoping, from all of them. Because they always consider American as a potential threat. And that threat could be existential, or it could be in the background. For Deng and Jiang and Hu, and that threat is in the background. And we have to watch out. We have to do business with them, make money and get rich. But at the same time, we watch out, make sure they don't infiltrate us in their ideological or their cultural or their political mindset. But for Xi Jinping, that is existential, because he realized if he does not make the people hate the American and block every American influence, he might lose his power. Not necessarily in terms of a U.S. invasion of China. As we know, U.S. would never invade China. Why would they do that? If they want to invade, they want to invade here. I mean, British Columbia here. This is a beautiful, vast, unoccupied land. And with a tremendous amount of natural resources and natural beauty, and almost no one to guard the border. Only a couple of senile, semi-retired U.S. custom officers or Canadian officers sitting there and chatting with themselves and let you go. So that is the, well, I shouldn't denigrate them like that, because I do see some young custom border control officers. But for them, I guess that's a bad career path, because if you put on your resume, what's your military or service experience? Oh yeah, I functioned as a border control agent in the Canadian-U.S. border. Oh yeah, that's so exciting. It's one of the most boring jobs because there's nothing to do. Back to the U.S. So they could, why don't the U.S. take Canada? Why don't the U.S. take Mexico? Why don't the U.S. take Japan? And why do they want to choose to take a natural resource poor, overpopulated, heavily polluted land, the mainland China? Of course, China has a lot of natural beauty, a lot of fantastic natural sceneries, but still, there is no rational reason whatsoever why the U.S. would want to invade or occupy or take control of China, even by any measure. But then, where does this 美帝亡我之心不死? It is really ideological. It is really what American brain, culturally, politically, could become a force that is driven by Chinese people themselves to destroy this Communist Party of China of the past 70 years. And this is why this hatred will continue as long as the Chinese Communist Communist Party is in power. And but back to Russia, is the Chinese-Russian relationship really as good as it seems? Well, Putin may not be in power for long. Putin's Russia, even if he stays in power, Putin's Russia may not view China as a true ally, because they knew their vast Siberian territory is mostly unoccupied. Despite that, they have this Russian Empire, imperial ambitions. That unoccupied territory could become threatened by the neighboring China, because China is desperate for agricultural land, desperate for forests, desperate for all kinds of natural resources. Whether China is willing to fight Russia for that, I doubt it. Because for the communists, they don't really care about expanding China or anything. What they really care is to stay in power. This I have mentioned many times. So this is the basic point I'm trying to make. China hates America today. Chinese communists will hate America in the future. So strictly speaking, it is the hatred by the Chinese communist rulers against the political system of the United States. They dress it up as the hatred of the Chinese people against the United States.